to the Workforce Connections podcast, where we discuss workforce development in Southern Nevada. Here's your host.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the WC podcast. Today, we have another very special guest. Please help me welcome Lori Wilkinson, Vice President of Employee Benefit Consultant at Brown & Brown, and my fellow Vegas Chamber trustee. Lori, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, me. So proud to be here.
Yeah, it's great to see you. So first, what we do to help our viewers and listeners that don't have the pleasure to know you like I do is to kind of let them know where you were born, where you grew up, went to school, college, take them all the way to your first job, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to guess here, but I probably have, in terms of the people who have been on your show, probably one of the longest running histories in the state of Nevada. My family actually moved to Northern Nevada during the Homestead Act in 1874.
Wow.
They came from England, go west, young man,
Wow.
find a better life, sold everything they had over there and came to this country and homesteaded a small ranch called the Cave Creek Ranch. So I'm 4 generations, and today my family's there. We raise Angus cattle, and my brother is really leading the operation, and then my mom is still in partners with him there. So I have the pleasure of being able to go back and to participate and see all the great things that they continue to do.
What's the town you were born and grew up in?
It's very small. It's called McDermitt. It's right on the Oregon-Nevada border. I actually had 13 kids in my class, so very, very small. Also grew up very close to a Paiute Indian reservation, so many of the children that I grew up with were born and raised on that Indian reservation. And I knew these kids from the time I was a small girl until I finished my high school. And when I go back, I get to see them still today, so that's kind of fun. Not having much access to close schooling after that, my parents wanted to make sure that I got a good education. And so they sent me to Southern Utah, St. George, not far from here, where my mom's my grandparents on my mother's side were from there. And so they sent me to school there. And I went to then Dixie College. It's now changed now. Yeah. And that was a really good experience for me because it wasn't too small, really a lot bigger than what I was accustomed to. When you think about going from a class of 13 now to a small 2-year college with about 2,000 kids, it was a pretty new experience for me because I didn't have a whole lot in common with those kids outside of being able to speak the same language and, being about the same age, but everything else was different. I was driving hay machinery and pulling cabs and branding and writing, and these kids were going to movies and water skiing and all that. So
yeah,
it's kind of an interesting experience. And then I went from there and I finished my education at Utah State University in Logan. And remember interviewing on campus at Logan for my first job. And I started my first job with Nestlé Foods.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's a big international company.
Yeah.
Wow. How long did you stay there?
Actually, I was only there for 10 months because I got recruited. So I started my career in consumer goods and I got recruited very quickly to come to work for the Mars family, which at the time was a very, very big deal.
Yeah. Up here.
Well, yeah. So Ethel was their mother.
Wow.
So Forrest and John Mars, Ethel was their mother.
Wow.
And they started that later in honor of her. But so my job was to sell Snickers and M&Ms, but I kind of became very quickly recognized in the field for being very good at what I do, because if you go into the grocery store and you see the facings, right, where you buy I would always go and steal Snickers and M&M's facings and put 2 more facings of Nestlé's products. And so they said, who is that person? We need to go hire her. So
So you've worked not only in your own, or you've seen your own family business, the way of life up there in the raising cattle, but then you came here and kind of your first professional experience was also a family company, if you will. Has that shaped the rest of because my next question was, continue to take us down your professional career, to get where you are now.
Yeah.
And does those first early experiences shape the way you view business and where you want to work? The fact that you kind of, until then, were in family-owned businesses?
Yeah. I have to say, I consider myself unbelievably fortunate to have been raised in a family environment, because as children, you have to learn how to work and you have to learn how to make decisions at a very early age. I was driving tractors when I was 3, believe it or not. I was on my knees and, looking, over the top, between the steering wheel and the top of the cab or whatever, just to see, because your family had to help. I also learned how to be very solution oriented, because it wasn't like you could go run to your parents' if there was a critical situation, to find a solution. So so I can just say that experience, as I think back on it, taught me to be very collaborative with my sibling. I have one brother, his name's Nick, and we had to learn to be collaborative, had to move through fights when we disagreed about stuff. Learned very quickly the value of hard work, right? My dad always said, be willing to work, be willing to push through the hard things, because that will help you create success in your life. So I've never shied away from hard work. He also was very big on the value of a dollar, because if you had to work for the things and then you actually got that paycheck, right? You were able to connect that to something that meant something to you. It wasn't like your parents were just giving you an allowance that wasn't connected to anything real. So, those things were quite foundational for me in me being able to move through a tough situation and moving out of a small community into an environment that was very unfamiliar to me. And then having the opportunity to find and create my own success by be willing to do simple things like work hard, be collaborative, be a good person, be a friend, be a mentor, do all those things that I think became very natural to me because I had that foundation.
Wow. And how do you switch or how do you get to the healthcare employee benefits? Where in that professional journey did you get into that industry?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a little saying on my wall that says, be open to whatever comes next, because I think sometimes people are very concerned about, well, I'm going to go down this path and get my education. And then they find they don't even really like sort of what they were studying, and they end up doing something else. And so I like this idea of being open to whatever comes next. And I think if you create a foundation of learning how to sell, like I learned how to sell a product very early on. And I don't care what industry you're in, we're always selling, right? I learned foundational things like finances. To be in any kind of business, you need to understand the core finance structure of revenue, what's coming in and what's going out. And then, the interesting thing about this is that while I started my career and I had an amazing career in consumer goods, so I went from Nestlé Foods, I got recruited, as I said, to go to Mars. And then I also got recruited again after 10 years with the Mars family to go to work for the Coca-Cola company.
Wow.
So I moved, had the opportunity to experience different markets, different parts of the country. And so I had the opportunity to go to work for the Coca-Cola company. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do that was because I'd been in sales and sales leadership, but I wanted the idea of working for one of the best marketers in the world. Because again, that's the other thing that we're always doing. We're marketing. That's part of that sort of sales strategy. And then after being there for 10 years, so I lived in Atlanta and did some amazing things, managed very, very large client relationships, American Airlines worldwide, Club Med worldwide, Sheraton Hotels worldwide. I wanted to get closer to my family because again, I have this longevity or this deep family roots back here in Nevada. And there were some things that were happening at Coke that I didn't love in terms of structural, large corporate changes. And so I came back to this market because it was relatively close to my family. And I decided to leave. And as things would have it, be open to whatever comes next. I reconnected with a college roommate of mine that I hadn't seen in 20 years. Wow. And it just so happens that she lives down the street from me, 5 minutes away. And we reconnected and she said, what are you interested in doing? And I said, I feel like this is kind of the end of the road for me where I was. And she said, well, why don't you come into business with me in healthcare? And I said, I don't know anything about healthcare. And I've been 20 years into my career, right? And so she said, that's okay. I want all this other great skill set that you've learned. And I want you to bring that thinking into healthcare because healthcare we need to be more innovative in healthcare than we are today. And so bring that with you and come and join me in a business. And so I became a partner. I became a partner in Waymark Insurance Services and was our own consulting firm, brokerage and consulting, working with employers on their employee benefits. And then we had the opportunity again with a change in 2015 to be acquired. So again, because it was open, right? Be willing to learn, be willing to be vulnerable, had the opportunity now take all this stuff that I've learned, now be an owner of my own business again, and then get that business to be positioned to sell. So we had the opportunity to sell it to Brown & Brown in 2015. So
wow.
That's what brought me here.
And you've stayed on with Brown & Brown?
Yeah, stayed on. Yep, after the earn out. So again, lots of learning, right? You go through a process of selling a business. We had 8 people in our office. They had more auditors in our office than we had people, right? As we went through that acquisition. So again, it's this idea of being willing to be a continuous learner in your life, I think just helps to keep you positioned at all points in your life to do other things that could be interesting to you. And would I've ever said was healthcare that's what I wanted to be? No, but I do recognize this. I have a very deep care for people. It really comes back. It really kind of goes back to this being raised on a ranch where I was around people who cared about me and my neighbors and where there was really deep care for one another. And so I realized that very quickly resonates for me in my ability to do my job in serving my customers and their members.
Very good. Well, let's dive down into healthcare because, like you said, everybody's talking about it. This is kind of a compound question that you can unpack for me, but I want to kind of talk about, the healthcare costs. Everybody, we are an employer here too. And so we see that the cost of healthcare for employees is rising. Also, it's a more diverse workforce than ever with an aging workforce and also the newer generation. And so the question would be, what kind of employee benefits, should employers like Workforce Connections and others be prioritizing? How do you handle the issue of rising healthcare costs? Again, I know multiple things to unpack there. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm going to really kind of start on the employer side. We all know that medical insurance is really the core part of an employee benefit strategy. And again, we could just really go down a rabbit trail on just that piece of it itself. But from an employer perspective, I think it's really critical that employers align themselves with very sophisticated consultants like myself. Gone are the days of a broker that really just goes to a carrier and shops and presents the product. Gone are those days, truly. And so I think when you have the opportunity to be aligned with more sophisticated consultants, they're going to have access to strategies from a funding level, right? You're probably in a fully insured strategy from an employer perspective. But as you sort of grow in size and scope, you can access now different funding strategies that allow us to unbundle that fully insured premium and to start to look at ways of driving costs down. Pharmacy is a really, really big deal today. And if you're in a fully insured strategy, you really don't have the opportunity as the employer to say, well, I want to reshape what I'm doing with pharmacy to help mitigate my costs. You don't have the opportunity to do that. When you move into different funding strategies, you do have the opportunity to do that. So that's really one part of that. Again, very sophisticated, takes somebody who really kind of understands what's out there in the marketplace and can provide you as an employer the options that best serve you. When it comes to the second part of your question, I start to think about the benefits that employers should look at providing based on what the needs of the employee are. And I think employee benefits is very confusing to people, right? It's complicated. People really don't want to deal with it. They just want it to work when they need it. But I think employees also are looking for employers who are willing to be out of the box in the benefits that they provide. So when I talk to employers and then employees about why we have certain kinds of benefits we make available, yes, core things like medical, dental, and vision are really important core parts of that strategy. But there are so many other things now that impact employees where they need resources. So I talk about it from a whole person health perspective, meaning medical, dental, vision. Yes, that's part of that whole physical health. Then you have mental health, right? Mental health is continuing to grow. And as a result of that, we're seeing resources being made available outside of what's been typically traditional an employee assistance program. You need more robust initiatives. And then I take that on down around the continuum to things like financial. I mean, we probably all see life insurance and short and long-term disability, but why? Do members really understand the whys of that? And then we bring in things like legal to support that, legal benefits to help people start to think about we should be looking at wills and trusts because less than 30% of the population, working population between 30 and 59, even have a will or a trust. That's very tragic in my mind.
Yeah.
So for employers to start to bring in those resources and start to educate on the why. And then really last but not least, I start to talk to people. I've been really spending a lot of time talking to people about identity, privacy, and security protection. Last year alone, over 1.1 million new issues with identity theft. Over $12.7 billion of losses to people in the United States from not having good privacy and security protections in place. And again, that's something, if you don't have a sophisticated consultant, even is really maybe bringing that to the attention of the employer.
Yeah, those are big numbers,
Isn't that frightening?
Yeah, that's big numbers. So if somebody was to, again, call you at Brown & Brown an employer, how does your company tailor these benefit plans to meet, like you said, those unique needs of the employer and what they want to provide or what their employees need? How do those questions go? Does it start with something as simple as, do you have an older workforce and you need, this kind of care? Do you have more of a younger workforce? What are the questions that you use or the subjects you explore to really tailor their benefits to what their employees need?
It's a great question, Jaime. And again, it's not a cookie cutter, right? We come at it from that approach. The very first thing we do is we look at the census and we identify what are those different demographics within that workforce. The other thing that we do is we have access to tools using zip codes of those members, and we dissect that information and we look at it in this population. The tool that we use is called Artemis Health. And there's 30 million members in this database. We take those zip codes for those people and we put it in this database, and then we analyze based on things that members need, right? Are you in an area in that zip code where you have access to healthcare? What if they don't have good access? Mm-hmm. Are you in an area where you have access to good food? Are you in an area where you have access to education on healthcare and why you want to take care of yourself? What's going on with childcare? What's going on with housing costs? So we take all that information, we extrapolate it, we pull it into the system, and then we benchmark it against employers of like and similar nature. So then we can start to see very quickly, what are the gaps that you have that you might not be addressing? And if you address them, would you do a better job of attracting and retaining the talent that you're looking to, have access to? We just did this for a company that we just started serving, and it's very interesting because they didn't even tell us that childcare was an issue for them. Mm. We identified it through the RFP process. We ran their census of people, and they were 30 points higher than the benchmark in terms of childcare. And when we mentioned this to the customer, they said, "Oh my gosh, we've been hearing about this from employees." So then we can then take that information and then we can go access tools in the marketplace that then are going to be designed to help support that member in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And once the employer gets that, once they're equipped with the kind of benefits and programs that actually will meet the need of the employees, my next question would be, how does an employer use that to really state their relevance and really highlight how competitive they are in the market because they're doing those kinds of things? Is that as easy as employee messaging, or is there an employer need to do more to really stay competitive in that regard?
I think in the hiring process, certainly that's a big part of it. I think employers get caught up in this idea of that members are just really focused on salary. They're really not. And we're seeing more and more that employees are really gravitating towards employers who they see are more focused on things that impact them in their daily lives. If you think about it, if you have an employer who offers something very simple like a medical dental vision, but these are young families and they've got maybe issues with childcare or maybe issues with tuition reimbursement, right? They're trying to figure out how to pay back college debt. So if that employer does a good job understanding the demographic that they're going after and then talking directly about the programs that they know that demographic is sort of going to be interested in having, they do a much better job, again, in that whole attraction and retention strategy. I think part of that also, Jaime, is getting employers to ask those questions. I find a lot where employers aren't also sophisticated in really asking or reaching, and maybe it's because they don't know they have access to sophistication in the marketplace in terms of consultants. Yeah. But the least of what I do in my job, Jaime, is selling insurance. Mm. It's the least of what I do. Mm. And if I'm doing a good job, again, I'm thinking about what's important to the member and what's also important to the employer, because we're balancing this idea of value, right? Providing value to my employees, but also mitigating my cost, because behind salaries, healthcare costs have got to be a very quick, close number two.
For sure. And then you have retirement benefits as well, which are, all over the place in government and private sector. And you have the supplemental stuff as well. And it's all important, I think, depending on, who needs what, because if you had a workforce that were all the same age, the same genetic makeup, then it would be easy.
Right.
But because all these different needs, that's the hard part.
It actually makes my job really fun, though, because when I can get an employer to really jump on board with the way that we see the world, and we can start to help them make those shifts that drive costs down, that impact their ability to attract and retain, and they listen. And I think the other thing that's sort of happened, sometimes people see insurance salespeople as one step up from a used car salesperson. I think that's really tragic because they're shortchanging, the opportunity that they have to align with me as a partner. I mean, when I engage with my customers, I'm a partner to them. I'm not a partner to them just on the employee benefits. I'm a partner across their business. So as an example, one of our partners is Mob Museum. Mm. They've been a partner to me since they were 2 employees.
Wow.
So we've had them for a very long time. And as a partner to them, I understand the things that are important to them, and they're in the business of driving revenue to their bottom line as well. And that's by selling different things. So if I can, through my network, not only be a great partner to them from an employee benefits perspective, but also help them drive revenue to their business, I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Didn't they take over the 5th floor up there at the Smith Center?
They did, yeah.
Where the Vegas Chamber of Mary Beth and her team used to be. You said a key word a little earlier that I wanted to come back to, this idea of employee well-being.
Yeah.
And so now a lot of, again, it's not just the physical, it's the invisible stuff that you have to worry about too. And so how do you see your customers integrating this mental piece, this mental wellness into the physical and as you said, even financial wellness pieces that are important to every family? It's not just your health, it's your physical health, it's your financial health, your mental health.
Yeah.
How do you see employers putting that all together?
That's also very complicated. I'm going to start with kind of this wellness. This wellness term is very, very broad. And, we've seen a move as employers are trying to encourage their their teammates to be more healthy, to put in programs to really kind of encourage them to take better care of their health. What we find in many cases is that if you're going to be a healthy and well person, you're pretty much predestined to be that way. It's very difficult for somebody who is not interested in changing their habits to do that naturally. So there's a couple of different ways that we look at it. Really, the first is, do you want to, as an employer, put in something that's a feel-good, like gym memberships, programs around eating healthy? You can certainly do those kinds of things and then create a reduction in an overall premium, in exchange for a member getting their wellness exams and things like that. What we found is that those things are not easily tied to ROI. So they can be very expensive, but we're not able to tie them back to ROI. So the second piece of that is what I'm going to call population health. What population health does is it actually drills down into the details of the plans where we see the claims actually coming from. And once you get beyond things like the cancers and those kinds of things that you can't necessarily predict, you very quickly start to see things like high cholesterol, sugar diabetes. And you hear about it all day, every day on the radio, right? Our population is becoming heavier, more and more issues with sugar diabetes. All those things now then also impact things like musculoskeletal, stress on the frame, stress on our bodies. And so we start to see those claims really start to rise and be continuous claims. So when you put in this idea of what's called population health, you're putting programs in place to directly impact those members where they are and help them. So a lot of times, if diabetic medication is not easily accessible or it's cost prohibitive, people won't take it. So you've got to have programs in place to make sure that people are on those medications so that we can start to get those conditions under control. So again, I know that was a lot, but it really depends on what the strategy is. That's just kind of the kind of that physical. The mental health, you mentioned that a couple times. Mental health is really, again, looking at your claims and what kind of mental health are driving those claims within the plan and putting in resources that are outside the plan, but provide a higher level of care and service so that that member has better access. Because we all know, we talk about it again in Las Vegas all the time, access to healthcare, access. There are other tools to help us increase access without having to just be focused on that core healthcare plan.
What about the financial aspect? Do you see your partners, your employer partners, implementing financial wellness, financial education programs?
Yes, certainly. Our expertise is not on the 401k side, right? But that's a big part of that. Mm-hmm. We're closely connected to whoever provides that 401k strategy because we help sort of provide the education or embed it in our overall strategy to the employees from an education perspective. But again, if I can go back to this whole person health strategy that I talked to you about and start talking to people about wills and trusts and then give them the tools, right? If they had access to a really good legal benefit. So as an example, I have a legal benefit that I use called Legalese. And what they do is they come in and just for that once a month sort of cost, which is a very, very low cost, they'll come in and do a will and a trust at no cost to the member. And it extends not to just that family, but if they have parents. So I have a situation where one of my clients said, yes, I got my own will and trust done. And then I knew my parents needed to be adjusted. So they were able to work with their parents to get it adjusted as well at no additional cost. So again, those are things that to me are very compelling. And as long as we just do some general education to remind people these things are important and you should be addressing them, because what's a tragedy to me is when you find yourself in a situation where you do have a life event where unfortunately somebody passes away and they don't have their affairs in order. It's very painful for the families that they leave behind. Doesn't happen often, but if you have your affairs in order and we can give you the tools to do that and educate you on the why, that's why we put in things like short and long-term disability, because we want to help people protect their paychecks. Mm-hmm. And then the life insurance is sort of that other piece, right? Because you want to build life insurance in to support those outstanding debts that you have. Again, in the God forbid situation that you pass, that your family members that you're leaving behind don't have all these challenges because things haven't been put in order. Or you have benefits going to somebody who shouldn't have been a beneficiary. So we do try to do a lot of education along those lines. And again, it's by working with really good partners to help us building those benefits in a way that are not cost prohibitive to the employee.
Sounds great. Now, again, how I get to run into you and spend time is through our common role as trustees for Mary Beth at the Vegas Chamber. What do you find is your favorite thing about being a trustee? What do you find yourself passionate about in your role as a trustee of the Vegas Chamber?
I have to say I was so honored to have my name come up as an opportunity or to be voted on as a trustee. I really take it as an honor. I see the role for me as being more of a servant leader, because I think one of the things that's really great about the chamber is that we're bringing business people together in a way to network to help each other build their businesses, right? And so if I can, just through the resources that I have, be a resource to somebody else to help them grow their business, I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited about mentoring people. A lot of times, I don't know about you, but networking sometimes is kind of hard. Sometimes you're in a better mood around networking than others, but if you go into a situation and you have somebody that's already knows that you're a new member and is actively saying, gosh, it's so nice to see you here. Let me introduce you to these 5 people, just so you can build your own network and it helps them have a better experience. So I'm personally pretty passionate about that. And I try to be very aware in my job in supporting as a trustee. And then the other thing too, again, being in healthcare, I sit on the Association Healthcare Committee. So where we spend a lot of time being very focused on what are the plans and programs and how are they priced and are we providing the best resources to the Vegas Chamber members, because those are really, really important resources to our members. So if I can use my expertise to lean in and help negotiate or help get better access to things that we need, then I'm going to do that. So I certainly have passion around that. And then I am trying to get more engaged from a political perspective. I've never been great at that. When you grow up on a ranch, things are pretty black and white. There's not a lot of things that are really gray, and politics tends to be a little gray to me. Yeah. But I know it's important. And so if I can, again, bring the expertise that I have as things are being, as bills are coming on the floor legislatively that we know impact businesses and employees, if I can be a resource there, that's really where I want to spend my time.
That's really good. Earlier, you said you shared with me you grew up in what we consider vast country here in northern Nevada.
Vast country?
Yeah, vast as in the vast culture, right?
Uh-huh.
But I know we've had a couple of guests here. One of them, Dale Urquiaga, who grew up in that same area, and then Brian Sandoval, of course, our former governor. Did you run into them in your childhood, early years?
I know the Urquiaga name for sure. And I actually, when Brian was governor, I happened to be back in Winnemucca for the 4-H fair that they were having because my niece and nephew were showing their beautiful Black Angus steers. And so I did have the opportunity to meet him then, but
Cool.
Wonderful guy. I mean, the fact that he literally made himself available to come down to participate, I thought was really said a lot about him as a person and a supporter of the agriculture.
Yeah.
Because agriculture, many people don't really think about it, but agriculture is an important part of our economy as well.
For sure. And they both, like you, grew up on cattle ranches, and I think people back then were different. And so I'm glad to hear that he made himself available that day. But enough about your professional side. We also wanted to spend some time hearing about your personal side. And so when you're not out there in the community in your role as a Vegas Chamber trustee, when you're not out there doing business with Brown & Brown, how do you fill your time? What brings you personal satisfaction, fulfillment? What hobbies, do you get to go do and enjoy with your family? What does the personal side look like for Lori?
Yeah, so my husband and I, we like to cook, and that's fun. I don't know if that's good news or bad news for me because I'm a good cook as well. Again, growing up on a ranch, my mom, phenomenal cook and made everything from scratch.
Wow.
So, I got to pick up that skill set. So my husband really enjoys, we enjoy cooking together. So that's kind of fun. We both like being outside. I think, again, I grew up outside.
Yeah.
Now I spend a lot of time in office and, it's very different. So I really find the idea of getting outside kind of refreshes myself. And so when I can, I go home to the ranch.
Oh.
I do like to try to do that. It just really plugs me into things that are very real,
Yeah.
And then we also have, on my mom's side, my grandmother's property, and we have fruit trees. So we have like 50 fruit trees. So we go up there every couple of weeks and we're outside. I'm taking care of peach trees and apricot trees and cherries. Cherries just came on. And so we were able to bring cherries back to our friends. And so we enjoy that. We enjoy, just again, being outside. So pretty simple that way. I do love to travel. Again, I got kind of the travel bug when I was working for Coke because I had the opportunity to be really all over the world. Had the opportunity to go to Vietnam, had the opportunity to go to North Africa. So I love the idea of that, of the adventure of traveling. So I do like that too, but don't get to do it as often because I'm still working. So.
Yeah, that's great. I think when I think about cooking, I have my own. We all do. I wanted to ask you to maybe paint the picture on an ideal cooking night. Does it start cooking outdoors, or do you rather cook indoors?
That's funny. We actually really like to grill
outside. Okay.
Yeah. Again, if it's not too hot.
Yeah.
It's getting a little hot now, but again, it's a good steak is always really good for me, or a good tri-tip. And, there's nothing better than having it char grilled. So I really do enjoy that. We probably have actually a lot in common that we could talk about around grilling meat.
Exactly. My father was from Argentina, and so lots of grilling in our household.
Right.
And my next question for you is, while that grilling is happening, and that's a process because it's conversation, is there wine in your cooking process, or is there other libations, or how do you, accompany the cooking?
Once in a while.
Okay.
I do enjoy a good glass of wine once in a while, but I just, one of the things I think is really interesting about this idea of cooking is it gives you an opportunity to spend some really good time with your spouse, with your family. And I think a lot of that is missing today.
Yeah.
Again, I grew up in an environment where you ate 3 meals a day together. And around that dinner table, you had conversations about what were going on, what happened in your day, what's going on with your family, what kinds of things do you want to do? And also what got created are stories, family stories that then get passed down. And so I realized that I feel like I'm a good conversationalist. And I think one of the reasons why I am is because as a small child, I was engaged in those conversations and was able to hear those stories And so it's very easy for me to strike up a conversation with somebody and to really be engaged and curious about who they are and what's important to them and start to build that rapport with that person. So there's so many things that really come out of that. I think it's very simple, right? My husband always says to me, Lori, I'm a very simple person, but I think there's so much goodness that come out of really, really simple things.
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be running to the next thing all the time. It can be having a good time in your home, doing something as simple as cooking.
I agree. Again, you share with us a little bit of your childhood, and I often reflect and say, I feel like life gives you wisdom over these years, experience, scars. And so I always think, I wonder if the 18-year-old version of myself would even listen to me today, because I could avoid him so much pain in the growing. And of course, that there's no time capsules yet. But if it's not the 18-year-old version of ourselves, Lori, what could you tell an 18-year-old today that looks at you and relates to you because they grew up like you did and they have dreams to one day be successful like you, own a business, sell it, be a community, pillar like you are now? What advice would you give them? What have you learned that you can pass on to them? Say, here's some things you might want to keep in mind, as you go from 18 and enter your professional career.
That's a great question. I go back to work ethic is, again, really a cornerstone. Be willing to work hard. I think the other thing would be courageous. Be courageous. I think about leaving that small community that I left to go to school. And because I had so little in common with the kids I was going to school with, I spent a lot of time being really homesick. And my dad just kept saying, you got to push through it and you got to be courageous. And I'm glad he was there very gently kind of nudging me, because I think when things get hard, we go, no. And sometimes parents, they don't want children to suffer. So they say, okay, you can just come home. Well, the child misses the learning, right? By allowing, by not sort of pushing into things being a little more challenging. So I would say be willing to be courageous. I would say to be curious, be naturally curious, be curious in other human beings, and be willing to connect, because you never know what that person might, some little nugget that they might give you. The other thing that I would say too, I'm a big proponent of being very connected also to older people. Older people give us amazing things to learn from. And sometimes older people get discarded as not having value. And I think that's extraordinarily unfortunate. So I always am very sensitive to people who are older than me, and I'm very quick to build relationships with them so that A, I can learn from them, and B, that I make them feel like their contributions are still valuable. I would say to have mentors, to find mentors, all ages of your life, that are willing to sort of plug into what's important to you and will help you get to that next step. I tell people all the time, build your board of directors. You're never too young to build a board of directors, and make it a very diverse board of directors. People from all age groups, people from different cultures, people from different ways of thinking, because it helps you shape the way that you want to go forward and see the world. And I think, if you make an attempt to do those things, you just create like an amazing foundation. And I go back to that. Like, I'm very lucky. I had an amazing foundation, great parents, great community. I had a wonderful, even being that small community, I recognized that little community of people who cared about me as a child, of somebody who'd been there for a long time, shaped me as a person. And so if you can find that, even in a large city like Las Vegas, I think that's so important.
Yeah, great advice. Lori, as we near the end of this podcast, we always like to give our guests the opportunity to talk about events, happenings that are coming up in the calendar, whether it's with Brown & Brown, the Vegas Chamber, any organizations, things you're involved with. Anything that you want to share with our listeners, our viewers, they should be aware of, keep their eye open for? Yeah.
So, I love being engaged in the community, and I like being engaged in things that are very different. I'm a trustee on the Nevada Ballet board, and I often sort of laugh at that because I never raised around dance. I'm not a ballerina. I didn't do anything like that. But I like the idea of what Nevada Ballet brings into our community. They bring dance down into our school systems. They do a lot of really, really amazing things. We're also in the middle of looking at a fundraising effort for a new Nutcracker. So that's very exciting. Wow. So we'll have a new Nutcracker this season, which, it's such an amazing thing to experience around the holiday season.
Yeah.
So we're very actively engaged in that. And then I also spend my time in two other areas. One, Capstone Christian Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with them, what they're doing.
Capstone, no.
Yeah, no, amazing. They have an elementary school now. It's in the southeast part of our valley, but the founder, Bill Wadley, and his wife, Laura, amazing people. He has an unbelievable story. And his idea is we want to create more education that is designed to create world-class leaders, people who are, want to change the world. And so, the elementary school is in place, and now we're looking at building the middle school and the higher education, the high school. Just amazing. Just so kind of a fun thing to spend my time on. And then I also sit on the board of Capability Health and Human Services. Again, have a passion for that. It's tied to healthcare, and it really is designed. They're a nonprofit, but they're designed to really bring those physical therapy and occupational therapy resources down to families who need it the most and may not have the financial resources to access it. So again, I think those are to those who much are given, much is expected. So I feel like it's really important for me to give back to the community that I love and that I live in and work in every day. And if I can take some of the things resources and skill sets that I have to then further and get more resources out to the community, that's a big, important part of my job.
Well, wow. I didn't know you are involved in a lot of things, Lori. I don't know how you do it. I want to thank you for taking the time to come down and, speak with us and tell our audience about you and Brown & Brown. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
Well, that's it for another episode of the WC Podcast. We hope to see you at a future one. Until then, stay safe. All right, Lori, thank you for staying over to do our bonus segment called Against the Wall. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The first section is called Your Favorites. I'm going to give you a category. You're going to give me your favorite thing in that category. Let's start with your favorite food.
Steak.
Favorite beverage with dinner.
Coca-Cola.
Favorite dessert.
Strawberry shortcake.
Favorite car you've ever owned.
An Audi.
Favorite holiday.
Christmas.
Favorite book or movie.
Let Them.
Favorite college sports team.
Oh, UNLV.
Favorite professional sports team.
The Raiders.
Awesome. You made it through the first section. The second one is called Tough Choices. It gets a little harder.
Okay.
Vacation or staycation?
Vacation.
When you go out to another city, state, or country, would you rather stay in a hotel or an Airbnb?
Hotel.
When you retire, Lori, will it be on a ranch or in the city?
On the ranch.
If you could spend the day by the ocean or hiking in the mountains, which one would you choose?
Ocean.
If you could be a superhero, would you rather have the ability to fly or breathe underwater?
Fly.
The ability to speak with animals or speak any foreign language?
Animals.
Actions or words?
Action.
Truth or kindness?
Truth.
Justice or grace?
Grace.
Well, you made it past the second section called Tough Choices. The last one is called Finish the Sentence. I'm going to give you 95% of the sentence. You're going to finish it for me. You ready?
Okay.
If Lori could visit any place in the world, it would be?
India.
The best part about living here in Southern Nevada is?
The people.
Lori's favorite thing about her job at Brown & Brown is?
Serving others.
If Lori could travel back in time, she would travel to?
I would say the 1800s.
And 3 words that describe Lori are?
Kind. Mentor. Supportive.
I couldn't agree more. And doing the WC podcast here with us today was?
Phenomenal.
Well, thank you for staying over, Lori.